right, g'day, welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro. I am joined today by another candidate. We're just about on the eve of the federal election. It's ramping up. So I've got another candidate on. This time it's my local candidate that I get to vote for, which is great. I get to see what they're about and what they think, and I hope you'll enjoy it as well. Get an idea of what it's like across the state of Victoria, maybe across Australia, what the Libertarians are saying. Are they consistent? So welcome to the show, Mr. Ryan Redfern. How are you, Ryan?
Oh, I'm doing quite well, Pietro. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have a libertarian. I do only tend to get libertarians on the show. I've tried to get a couple of non-libertarians every now and again, but they tend to just ignore me. So
Yep,
it's
make
not
up for
through
that.
my fault that I have an echo chamber on this podcast, although probably somewhat to blame. Now, I think the most interesting thing to me, and I've said this a few times, for any seasoned watchers, they're probably sick of hearing me ask this question, but I think that what I'm trying to do, what you're trying to do, what anyone who's trying to promote liberty is trying to do is, more than anything, our biggest enemy is that no one knows about libertarianism, or very few people know about libertarianism in the mainstream, and I don't think that's by accident. So I think that the story of how someone's come across the ideology and how someone has become a libertarian is interesting because it gives us some insight into potentially getting more people to come across. And sometimes they're varied and different. So I was wondering if you don't mind telling us your story of how you became first libertarian and then I suppose involved with the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, well, I don't know if mine will be a particularly good example to use sort of as a test case going forward, because I came across libertarianism back in my early 20s. I bought a book from a Salvation Army store called Free to Choose by Milton Friedman, and for whatever reason, it piqued my curiosity to learn a bit more about economics, and that was one of the first books I ever read that was, talking about economic systems and that kind of thing. And for whatever reason, I was very fascinated in it. At the time, I was just working, full time straight out of high school, and it probably just percolated in the back of my mind. And then about 5 years later, I quit my job working for IBM Australia in IT, and I went and undertook a bachelor's degree in economics and finance at university, and for the next 3 years just went full time into my studies, and yeah, definitely found my niche. So I did a dual major in economics and finance, so I got a good exposure, I think, to sort of practical applications of economic systems, along with finance and how it all works technically, I guess. And as much as the university tried to demonize Milton Friedman and capitalism more generally, I think the fact that I was already sort of radicalized by the idea of people having the choice
What a
kept me
radical
from.
idea, by the way. What an what an insane
Yeah,
notion.
exactly, that people can people are actually inherently good, and they do make good decisions, and they know probably what's best for them and their family more so than in an inefficient bureaucracy. And then, fast forwarding where we are now, I've watched from the sidelines, I guess, the state of decay in this country, with the two-party system just sort of swinging back and forth and ever expanding and never actually retracting or innovating any of the things that they do. So what I see now is this just bloated, inefficient machine that's just ever increasing the number of taxes that they have to levy on us, because they can't get any kind of return on investment on the things they are spending, and they're wasting it enormously in so many ways. And in my professional career with my systems background from economics, I actually worked as an industrial engineer for a period with Mars Wrigley. So I was looking at optimizing assembly lines and machines and factory systems. And then from there, I got into continuous improvement. And then after that, I got a job at the university I actually graduated from, and now I'm working as an enterprise architect. So my professional role is I go into a large organization and I basically map the entire organization out: systems, processes, people, departments, and then I look for duplications, inefficiencies, and bureaucracy, and cut it and find ways to streamline an organization to make enormous profit, with like a roadmap to implement over time into like a strategic path to success. So I thought perhaps this could be a transferable set of skills with where we're at in government, and the Libertarians was just a no-brainer to reach out to and become a member.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. Do you think you could apply this to government? I mean, uh, admitting the fact that, like, assuming that government is willing to do something like this, do you think that would be a very transferable? Well, I suppose you do think. Where do you think some of the easiest low hanging fruit are? Then, just from off the top of your head.
Oh, there's so many to count. I do know there are a number of wasteful spends. Obviously people get a little bit taken aback, I think, at the idea of the libertarians going in and cutting government, because the first thing that pops to their mind is like, oh, we've got public hospitals and we like public hospitals, and we've got public schools, so we can't cut funding here and there, and I like that you can walk into a doctor, and so that these things are not like priority one things that people are going to agree on to ever get rid of anyway. And I think that's sort of like a false concern a lot of people have. I would say that there is definitely issues with some of the television programs, such as ABC and SBS, receiving upwards of $1 billion each per year in taxpayer income tax revenue that's essentially paid for and pushes the two-party system agenda as well out to the public. So you're paying to be sort of propagandized almost. To continue to support these agencies. And I don't think there's actually much of a return on investment in terms of actually people who are sitting there and watching these programs, and turning them into a subscription-based model as opposed to one that's just funded whether you like it or not could be a massive tax saving. I did the basic maths on every billion we cut out of government waste equates to roughly $69 per taxpayer in Australia off their income tax per year. So so if we're talking ABC and SBS being cut, we're looking at nearly 148 dollars or whatever it is off your tax bill each year. So when you start to look at deals that are $100 billion that you're cutting out, or even in the hundreds of millions, you can start to get a sense of how much money is actually returning back to Australian taxpayers, and that you can pretty quickly see how we'd be able to raise the income tax-free threshold to 50,000 and cut income taxes to 20% and benefit so many people. It's just waste.
Yeah, well, I mean, the ABC and SBS is kind of an obvious system of propagandizing, because if you watch it, like anyone who is not completely lefty, like you watch that and you're like, what is this abomination? Why are they showing this? Surely, like most people don't agree with this. I do think though that, I mean, even like you mentioned public schools and public hospitals and stuff like that. And yes, people can't conceptualize how removing public funding for these would actually end up being cheaper and a better product. Libertarians, obviously, we have this answer because we acknowledge that the removal of the free market is actually causing a less effective service. But apart from that whole aspect to it, like, these are also propaganda machines as well. I'm a teacher. I see it firsthand. Like, if you look at our curriculum, you probably have the same reaction as if you started watching ABC and SBS after you hadn't witnessed it for a long time. Like, these are propaganda machines as well, and the fact that they're all unionized and hospitals in much the same way, they use that language of they rely on that fear to get people to do the arguing for them that we can't get rid of these things.
And they're quite often very divisive in their topics, which is something that I think libertarians are good for Australia, because we've got so much division on these, sometimes quite benign things that are blown way out of proportion. And more often than not, one side of the debate is shut off, and that just leads nowhere good. If we can't have a functional democracy if one side of the argument's being shut down and branded, this label or that label. That's not going to work. So we need to have freedom of speech, and those institutions definitely do not support freedom of speech. Another big major savings, we're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars poured into net zero, which is another ideology around carbon emissions that I think's totally blown out of proportion in Australia as well. I've already been quite vocal on that online, but bringing people around to the idea of that is going to be worthwhile, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, if people aren't aware with what you've been saying online, what's your view on that? What is it that you're saying?
Well, look, without getting into whether or not climate change is a real thing or not, or human contributions to climate change are a real thing or not, I would ask people to just look at the actual data on it. So one simple example is that Australia has 18 coal-powered power stations. 18. And if you were to look at the top, so in a Curie article I did, they said that we're the 14th largest exporter of CO2 emissions or whatever, and that sounds terrible. But then you look at the top countries that are producing carbon emissions, which for the top is China, is 1,400 and something current active coal power stations. So if you look at 18 and you look at 1,400 and something, and you say that turning off that 18 is going to have any kind of effect to your models, you're just like, that's a blip. It's not even 1%. It's nothing.
Yeah, it's a rounding error. Yeah.
It's a rounding error, and you're absolutely smashing Australians and the Australian industry in adhering to that kind of ideology. Personally, I don't actually think there's an issue with carbon emissions. I don't, from what I've seen and what I've read, carbon emissions or carbon in the atmosphere has been 200 times higher during the last ice age, is what the geologists have reported on, and I've seen evidence for. So a lot of this carbon that's locked in the earth in the form of coal and oil and others was actually in the atmosphere thousands of years ago and during ice ages when there were living creatures on the planet. And I don't think it has as much of an impact as people think. And that also goes for methane. There's been a lot of conversation around, well, one-sided conversation around, the impact of the meat and dairy industry and cows and cattle more generally, and the fact we need to feed them all boava, which is a pretty harmful kind of substance in order to stop them farting and burping, which is just like ridiculous. So each molecule of methane that's emitted from a cow is expelled and actually breaks down into carbon dioxide and into which will eventually go back into the grass, and it also produces water. So it's like a net zero effect on the atmosphere if you just stretch the out by about 12 years. I think it takes for every single molecule of methane to break down and return to the ground into the form of plant life for cows to feed on. So the fact that people are saying it's going up in the atmosphere and it's blocking out the blocking out the sun's probably the next topic we need to talk about. But the science is not very settled as people think.
Well, what do you mean by blocking out the sun? I mean, let's go to the next topic.
Oh, right. Yeah, why not? Well, that's the obvious, the next crazy thing that's going on in the world. The UK's approved scientific experiment to inject chemicals in the atmosphere to block sunlight, which is in order to shield us, I suppose, from the warming of the sun, in an attempt to reduce global warming. I think, is that what they're calling it now? Is it global warming, or is it?
Don't they use climate change so that they're flexible to go with warming or cooling as they need it?
That's right. It's hard to know which one it is on the current day, but which is a bit ridiculous given how much they're investing in solar energy as a renewable technology to save the environment, and we're talking about blocking off the sun. aka we're not going to be able to have the sun charge the solar panels in the first place. So the forces at work there are working against each other a little bit. I would actually call for Australia to intervene with that in that scientific experiment. I don't think that they should be allowed to do something as ridiculous as that, as spraying. We're talking about preventing natural forms of carbon getting into the atmosphere because we want to protect the atmosphere. So why are we blasting chemicals in the atmosphere to block sunlight? Like that's James Bond villain tier kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, I think this comes to a few of the topics which you're kind of alluding to, things that we're not allowed to have adverse opinions on, is that they rely on like the catastrophizing of issues that may well be existing, may well be true in some part, and there are aspects of the truth that they use, and they catastrophize them, and in catastrophizing them, they make anyone who's trying to have a nuanced opinion on it an outlier and a heretic and an anti-science, whatever. But at the same time,
as pariahs. Yeah.
But it's not like we're doing this out of an abundance of caution, or we're like, hey, maybe it is, so we should. There are massive interests that people there are people who are grifting and making billions and billions of dollars, and government also leverages billions and billions of dollars to push these agendas because it means that they can continue to tax and spend and give their corporations and their friends money to chase these issues, which are seen by the population to be a catastrophe. The recent example, and I think climate change is probably a difficult one because the grip on information on that is still absurd. Like, if you look at anything establishment, anything, any of the mainstream opinions on this, like we're talking schools, we're talking the curriculum, we're talking universities, we're talking news stations, we're talking academia in general, like they still have a firm grip on this, to the point that you do sound like a little bit of a heretic to go against the grain on this. But the other example that springs to mind, like, is they catastrophized COVID. Now, COVID was an illness, like a disease, let alone the fact that it was from a man-made from a lab in China, and you weren't allowed to say this at the time. But it was harmful, and lots of people died. But they catastrophized this to the point where they destroyed the world. There was the largest transfer of wealth from the middle and the poor to the upper class, because they sold this as, if you aren't willing to do everything within the power of mankind, and I'm talking shutting down industries and destroying lives if we need to slow this thing, then you're a heretic and you want grandma to die and all that sort of thing. And we see this in so many places, like when you start looking for it, like this catastrophizing, and therefore they get to extract wealth as much as they want. I don't know. That's how I see, like, a lot of the correlation between lots of the issues that we're not allowed to talk about. What were, in your mind, some of those other issues that we're not allowed to talk about? Because they might be the same ones that I was about to ask questions on.
Yeah, well, there's definitely that. Probably before we jump onto that, I've got another topic I'd like to mention that's something we can't talk about. But while we're on COVID, I don't think people or realize just how much damage was done to the economy of Australia, especially in Victoria, through shutting down everything for 2 years, basically, under Dan Andrews' reckless decision making. I was one of the people that resisted the having the vaccine for a fairly long period of time, basically as long as I could, just because I'm a healthy person. I've been athletic, since I was a teenager. I've eaten a very healthy diet my whole life. I felt that my natural immunity would be more than capable of dealing with it. And it wasn't until I was sort of forced, I would lose my job and I've had that in writing, by the way, that I would lose my job on the following Monday if I didn't have it vaccine over the weekend. Went and had it done with the Pfizer shot in order to keep my job. And then a couple of weeks later, I was actually hospitalized with collapsed, having heart pain, couldn't breathe. I literally had to be rushed to the hospital, put in the emergency room for about 12 hours, having my blood taken, checking for enzymes. And they said, oh yeah, we found enzymes in your blood that are showing that you're having some kind of cardiac arrest. Have you been under stress lately? It was the first question they asked. And I was 26 years old at the time, and competitive athlete, which it was just ridiculous. And they sort of just brushed it off as, I'll just try and drink some green tea and don't play any exciting video games for a while, and you should be okay, was kind of the response they gave me, which was just ridiculous.
I knew it was violent video games. I knew that it was violent video games causing this excess mortality amongst young men who were vaccinated who did not need the shot.
Yeah, the 25 to 35-year-old young men who go to the gym. That's too many video games. That's why you're all dying from COVID. But so anyway, I was hospitalized and I was harmed from that vaccine, and I don't think I would have been otherwise from COVID. And ever since, I've actually had COVID 3 times since, and it was nothing compared to the symptoms I received from having those vaccines. But that was one thing that I was not able to talk about for a long period of time. And even mentioning it to GPs, they sort of give you like a crooked look, as though you're, talking about something you've just asked them for, a prescription for crack cocaine or something, is where they look at you and treated you. So, but now you can talk about it.
Now you can talk about it. There is still sort of it almost gives you the impression that we're living in 2 different worlds, because there's lots of people who now openly talk about it, and people who have crossed over and said, okay, I was wrong about this thing, and yes, it is purely harmful. But there's lots of people still living in the bubble that, to them, the memory is that the anti-vaxxers were nutcases, and they don't want to re-examine their premises there, because it would mean confronting the fact that they were a liar and a piece of shit and an oppressor and all the rest of it. Even at the time,
everyone likes to think that if they were in Nazi Germany when the Nazis came to power, that they'd be the ones that would stand up. But we saw in COVID just how many people complied with authoritarian regime, and it was sad to see.
even the GP thing, like the GPs were told explicitly by APRA that they were not allowed to recommend that people did not take the vaccine. Like that they had to recommend, or they would lose their jobs. And I knew GPs who have lost their jobs. I went to a GP who was not someone I knew to be particularly friendly, and I was trying to get an exemption after because I never took it.
Well done.
I did lose my job for it, but I was pretty happy to do that. And this GP who was not someone who I knew to be, particularly either side, and he admitted in the end that if I gave him my line, I was not going to take it, absolutely no way in the world, etc., etc., etc. This is why, and why. I don't think I'm at any risk. And in the end, he did admit, and I certainly won't name him, that if he was in my situation, he probably wouldn't take it either. But he has to tell me to take it. And this is just a guy.
That's
like
the science.
Yeah, and your GP is supposed to be someone who you go to, and they are going to give you their opinion based on your symptoms, based on their knowledge, based on all the study that they've done. They're going to give you their opinion on how best to pursue whatever, to make you better, or to avoid illness, or to avoid disaster, whatever it is. And that's the opinions that they're meddling with. Like the closest opinion you can get to a person's health is what they're meddling with through force, through force, you will lose your job, you will lose your profession. Sickening, disgusting. And there you go. The catastrophizing of COVID is one of the things that you're not allowed to. You weren't allowed to talk about it. I mean, now you're allowed, but it's still suppressed. It's not like the ABC is not going to do an expose on the lies told during that entire period.
Yeah, no, they're definitely pushing back on any kind of justice. I think we will definitely be pushing for that within the Libertarian Party as well. If we are elected, or a number of us are elected, we'll be hammering on that for justice. We won't forget. I certainly will never forget.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And there's a huge number of people who were never allowed to talk about the fact that they've been vaccinated, and that's criminal. It's nothing short of criminal. So we'll get to, and I'll frame this question so you can talk about some of the other things maybe. But so last week I spoke to John Humphries, who's the founder of the Libertarian Party, and we went through a variety of areas, a variety of topics on how the Overton window of what the major parties and many of the minor parties will talk about of things that are relevant at this election is so narrow, and so things that are so off to the side, not really relevant. Like they fight over the minutiae and avoid talking about the major issues. Now, he's an economist, so he spoke specifically about things like people aren't talking about like productivity and taxes and inflation and money printing and the Reserve Bank and things like that, which libertarians, obviously, we think that is kind of the nexus of power of how the government keeps us all poor and keeps themselves and their friends rich. But there is also this other aspect of a whole series of topics, and the modern, I suppose, word for it is we talk about them as like woke topics. Woke topics that there is this consensus opinion, apparently, amongst the academia and the establishment classes. And we're not allowed to have varied opinions on these at all. So if you had some others in mind, what are some of these that you think are especially pervasive that libertarians are speaking up on?
Yeah, I think even in the past couple of days, I mean, obviously climate change is a pretty big one, but there's in the past couple of days we've had the situation with the ANZAC Day ceremony, and a very, I think, one-sided reaction from both of the two party leaders, Peter Dutton Albanese and their underlings. And of course, you've got the mainstream media outlets in Australia and the funded ones by the government like ABC and SBS that are just 100% condemning, and I think bending the truth a lot on the narrative of what actually took place. And if you've watched the full video of that Welcome to Country service, I think you'd be pretty hard done by to say that was a very welcoming speech that was being given. I think it was quite condescending and also just out of place completely at an Anzac Day memorial where we're talking to veterans, elderly veterans, people who have actually fought for the freedom of this country, essentially sort of implying that they have no right to exist on this land and it was never theirs and it's never going to be seceded. And I think the ability for people to boo or express dismay at that does not make them a neo-Nazi. The people who were in that crowd fought the actual Nazis. And I think that, this authoritarian government is closer to a Nazi regime than the people who are booing this ever will be. So, I mean, there was, a confirmed National Socialist Party of Australia member in the crowd, but there was a number of people who were calling out in that crowd. So, yeah, to label them all as Nazis is just more labeling, name calling from these lowbrow argument creating establishment people.
Yeah. I mean, that's their new. No, it's not even new. It's the new dog whistle. Whenever there is some expression of discontent with the establishment, they're neo Nazis. I mean, to go back to the example of COVID, the anti-lockdown, anti-mandate protests. Lo and behold, all of the major news sources were saying that they were neo-Nazi crowds that were doing this. So always when there is some sort of challenge to power, it's neo-Nazis doing it. Yeah, as we all know, Nazism, since the 1940s, is very much on the rise. After its defeat in Germany, it actually moved to suburban Australia and now hides amongst the ranks of the ex-soldiers who fought against the Nazis.
Yeah.
It took them, what is it, 60, 70 years to come around to the ideology, but now they're sort of thinking twice about it, and they
I'd
might
like someone
it.
to actually, like these people that sort of throw that word around a lot, to actually articulate what that means. Because the National Socialists Party and that whole, fascist idea is very unlike what they're sort of labeling, people who are, doing certain things as. It's not even the same thing. Sometimes it's the complete other end of the spectrum. If you're someone that's for freedom of speech, less taxes and smaller government, you're basically the opposite of a Nazi.
Yeah, well, and ask them to define fascism, and they
Yeah.
have no idea, because the reality is that, as you said, like the way our governments are structured nowadays, where corporations that are hand in hand with the government get all the contracts and get all the power, and the government limits as much as it can speech that it doesn't like, is far closer to fascism
Yeah.
than anything else.
The high level of National Socialism is it's nationalized, aka government socialized control of all industry and distribution of wealth in a country. So you've got a fully socialized economy. You've got Reichmarks for your earnings. You are paid on your proof of work statements, receipts that you get in whatever job that you do, which you are then able to transfer into a currency exchange where you can buy goods and services that you need. And the government completely controls all of the arms of the government control the private, well, not private industry anymore because it's been seized by the government. And then anyone who comes out and tries to question it or have any kind of alternative view to the government's determined truth is dealt with by the Gestapo. Very similar to actually what we have in Australia by the current government, as opposed to the people who are actually trying to open things up and free things up a little bit. So it's just ridiculous.
What's it's like some theory on how long it takes to start talking about Hitler and the Nazis. It's within 6 minutes of conversation, most political conversations veer off to there. I did want to harken back though so the Welcome to Country, obviously. The way it's portrayed, yes, it's problematic because I think the booers were genuine and there was no place for it there. My view is that there is no place for a Welcome to Country. I mean, this is a completely like the elitism around the Welcome to Country and the Indigenous automatically given this pedestal because of past injustices from people who are no longer alive, is very much it creates a two-tiered society, which is antithetical to freedom and liberty. But this Welcome to Country, it's seen as this nice thing, and it's seen as this wholesome, very progressive, very modern thing, and but when you break it down, I think that it isn't. So, do you agree with that? Do you think there is a place for any Welcome to Country if there is, an appropriate spot for it? And I don't know if there is a policy necessarily for the Libertarian Party. Feel free to talk about simply what you think.
Well, from my own perspective, I think there is a place for Welcome to Countries, and I think that's within the Aboriginal communities that are practicing and living on their ancestral lands in parts of Australia and doing Welcome to Countries where they're actually appropriate to do so. My understanding of Welcome to Country is that on the smoking ceremonies is for a very personal one-to-one experience between people within that religion and within that subculture within Australia, and it absolutely belongs there. But I would say where it doesn't belong is in government institutions, schools, private organisations that have absolutely no connection to Aboriginal culture or anything like it, and it certainly doesn't belong at things like Anzac Day ceremonies, that kind of thing. I think they have the right to practice their religion and their culture within their own subgroups where it's actually appropriate to do so. But the current version we've got of it is so far removed from that that it's nothing but divisive. We had a referendum. If people can harken back a couple of years to their long-term memory reserves, we did actually have a referendum on the yes/no, and Australia overwhelmingly voted no across every state except for the territory of ACT. I think that's my recollection of it.
Yeah.
And instead of ceding to the will of the people, there's been a doubling down on it by Albanese and the government, and a lot of the arms of the government, including the boards of education and so forth, have been even more pushing it even more strongly, which was against the will of the people, actually, and it's undemocratic.
Yeah, it almost seems to be, it's like provocative, like it's trying
Yes.
to provoke this sort of reaction so that they can
Division.
discredit it. Yeah.
We don't need we don't need an Aryan voice to parliament. We don't need a Chinese voice to parliament. We don't need an Aboriginal. We have a one parliament. We're Australia, and we should all have an equal right to do so. And I think we do. What we've got now is special rights groups that are getting privileged access to things that they don't need or deserve, and we shouldn't be paying for.
Well, and apart from special interest groups, like they are immediate, you know they are going to be co-opted by more grifters and government agencies,
Yes.
and like it's not it's not like the Indigenous voice to Parliament will remain this nice little Indigenous message on the side. It will be used by leftist activists to promote their next thing. I did hear, I've heard one welcome to country that, I mean, maybe it's my low standards because I've heard so many now. I mean, in the education system, it's full of them. But I heard one welcome to country that I actually didn't mind, where the guy said, I want to pay respect to my ancestors and also all of your ancestors. And I just thought,
Wow.
wow. And in just those few words, like all the venom I'm usually feeling bubbling behind my eyes at those things was dissipated, because it was like, oh, right, we're back to a relatively level playing field, because you've deemed to mention the fact that I too come from people who who came before me, and I might like them as well.
That's wonderful, actually. I hear multiple a day working in the education industry myself, and I don't ever think I've ever heard one that's been phrased like that. Yeah, that would actually may even change things a little bit. I'm a sixth generation Australian, and I know the history of the convicts that I've descended from, and they were essentially, Irish slaves in chains that were sent to Tasmania and into work camps, that kind of thing. So there's an enormous amount of suffering and struggle for every culture, basically, that exists today in the world. And I think that venerance to ancestors isn't a bad thing, but it's definitely not a good thing when you're excluding everyone else for the sake of a small group.
Yeah, I decided if I'm ever, and I hope the day never comes, but if I'm ever forced to do or asked to do a welcome to country in a workplace, that's the kind that I'll do to avoid forsaking my principles in order to keep my job. I didn't do it last time. I certainly won't do it for a welcome to country.
Well, let's hope that it's not forced upon you, and you do have some choice in the matter.
Another issue. Sorry, we'll to veer off on that. Another issue which I think is very much in this vein is a cultural issue that is dividing everyone now, and I think a lot of it is probably spurred on by the fact that Trump's election has emboldened many people to be able to once again say the things that were for such a long time kind of hidden on the back burner. Although I also almost think that Australians have been coaxed into a false sense of security with his election, because while there the power structures may have changed, here very much the power structures are still suppressing these kind of ideas. But one is, and it starts with the transgender men in women's sports, but in general, like the trans activism movement is one that we can see it on the frontier as like the next big thing that is being pushed on us. And I know the Libertarian Party has a pro-woman, a pro-biological woman stance, which obviously is framed as neo-Nazi and as anti-trans and as hateful and oppressive and bigoted.
Like everything else these days, but yep.
Like everything else. So what is your view on that? What is your view on where that's going and potentially how to push back?
Yeah, look, personally, I don't think there's any problem with people choosing to live how they want to live, as long as they're not, encroaching on others. If they want to be, or if they are, I suppose, someone that's perceives themselves as having this gender fluidity and perhaps even being someone that wants to transition from one of the two or one of the many gender identities that may or may not exist, that more power to them, as long as they're not infringing on anyone else or trying to coerce anyone else or use government funding to drive anything that they're ideologically adhering to. I guess that's the libertarian side of things. On a more personal note, I'm married and I have a daughter, and I very much adhere to when it comes to the rights of women and the rights to have spaces that are free from, biological males from entering, be that change rooms, toilets, sports, especially sports. I think they have absolutely every right to push back on it if they don't agree, and they should be protected and supported in that, because up until a very short amount of time ago, that's been the reality for all of time, that we have very different biologies. We have, male and females have very, very different physiologies, and I think that there's definitely a risk to trying to blur that line or try to stifle any kind of objection to it by pro-female supporters. Or so I'm definitely a pro-biology when it comes to anything legal. So women should be protected to have their free spaces, and I think we need a lot more out of the liberals, I think, to come out and to take a bit more of a stance on that as well, a bit more publicly, because what we've seen yesterday in Melbourne, there was a pro female rights or freedom to, I forget the name of the actual
Yeah, it was
party.
called it was the Women Will Speak rally,
Yep.
which is kind of like the successor to the, if you remember, the Let Women Speak rally a couple of years ago, where there were the Antifa counter protesters, and then they were counter protested by the Nazis, and obviously it ended up being Nazis with the Let Women Speak.
There's always a Nazi eventually. Yeah.
Exactly. So this time it was called the Women Will Speak protest. Is the one
Right.
you're
Yeah.
referring
So
to.
what we've seen, yes, just in that was, people that are using their right to peaceful assembly to protest on their issue, and I think it's actually a very valid issue, because it's something that people are really vitriolic about at the moment. And what we saw in the videos, I mean, the headlines were saying there was clashes between the two groups with police and clashes between the groups in the public, but that's actually very far removed from the reality of things. What we saw was a rabid crowd or rabid mob of these pro-trans activists. I don't know how many of them actually were a part of that community, and perhaps just other people who wanted to partake in some violence and some anarchist kind of behavior, attacking the police. And those women that were protesting their right to their biological reality and their identity was under attack, and that's definitely not on. So things need to be set straight there, I think, to protect women's rights.
Yeah, I mean, let's not sully the good name of anarchists. I'm an anarchist myself. Though whatever that awful thing that they call anarchy is, has got nothing to do with good old Murray Rothbard, if you can see him behind me. Um,
Well, anarchy works when you've got a group of intelligent, cooperative, sort of nice-natured people in a group. I think if you're in our current state, it might lead to a bit of trouble if we were to go down that route.
well, it doesn't work if you subsidize the lunatics, which we now absolutely subsidize all of the lunatics that we can find. Whether we agree with them or not, we are forcefully robbed to subsidize those lunatics. So
Yeah.
yes, that kind of anarchy wouldn't work. We don't have to go down the anarchy rabbit hole. I mean, that's a debate that libertarians have insularly amongst themselves all the time. One last thing, we're reaching towards our time, but I did want to get your thoughts on something else, because most of the time, most people who do tune in to listen to kind of minor party politics podcasts and things like that, they generally agree with almost everything that we're saying. But one of the criticisms, I suppose, of minor parties, especially the sort of minor right, if we want to use that expression, is that, One Nation, Trumpet of Patriots, Libertarians, the old UAP, Ralph Babbitt, they all agree on most things, and it doesn't make sense for us to be splitting the vote in this way. We should be coalescing and forming this kind of minor right party that can rival or compete with the Liberals for their vote or whoever else. And that's the biggest problem. Now, as Libertarian Party advocates, we obviously think that no, we should pick the Libertarian Party over those other two. So I wondered if you could spend some time unpacking that a little bit. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, look, even not too long ago, I took the same opinion, and to my outsider perspective, I thought we really do need a third option for people to vote for. And looking at the landscape of the different parties, there is a lot of overlap where people agree. I'd say particularly among One Nation, Family First, People First, and Libertarians, more so than some of the other ones that are forming. And I think Libertarians really led the way in trying to facilitate those conversations for some form of alliance and working together. And what we ended up as an outcome was, Gerard Rennick's People First and Libertarians have a joint ticket in New South Wales, which was actually a major step in that direction for Australia to fulfil that need, that these parties actually listen to that as a requirement. But there are too many differences, fundamental differences between some of the minor right parties that will cause major issues if they were to just combine fully and combine forces. And you might end up with something that's similar to the Liberal Party today, where there's a huge amount of internal conflict, and it may not work as well as one of these individual parties were to gain strength on its own merit from the Australian public as well. I personally believe the Libertarian Party is the best third alternative for people to vote for, and that's why I've joined as a candidate. When I was reading the landscape on all of the different policies, what we really need more than anything is major taxation and economic reform. And I think Libertarians are best poised to deliver that, to actually deliver on the outcomes that we're promising with the removal of the fuel excise, the alcohol excise, tobacco excise to smash organised crime, the lowering of income taxes to 20%, the raising of income tax-free threshold to 50K for individuals, 100K for families. We are actually able to provide, and we're talking about removing these, this waste and bureaucracy from the system to pay for it. Some of the other parties are making statements without really backing it from, some kind of economic plan. I think One Nation does share a lot of similarities with us, and maybe they've borrowed some of our policies, particularly around the excise and some of their conversation around auditing the NDIS, rorting and scamming, which does exist.
Absolutely. There's more rorting than there is actual service there anyway.
Yeah, look, I think, even without abolishing the NDIS entirely, I think there is a tremendous amount of auditing that would be beneficial to Australian public, in that your money is no longer being wasted and it can be directed to people who genuinely need it. At a minimum. Obviously, we believe that everyone should have a lot more of their own money that they're earning to pay for the things they need anyway. And that's my major gripe as well with the major parties at the moment. The Greens and the Labor are promising to pay for all of these wonderful things with the money that we would have otherwise earned anyway. I find that hilarious that the Greens are saying that we're going to provide free dental to everyone, and that sounds really wonderful under Medicare. But then when you realise that if you'd voted Libertarians and you had your income taxes slashed by $10,000 per year, you could get some pretty good dental work done. You could have you could get those grills, whatever they are. You get diamond studs and diamond-studded fangs and all sorts of things for $10,000 a year, just in your income tax return that otherwise would have been spent on other people's teeth. From a principles, I think that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and just to your point, I do agree that I think the policy point that the Libertarians have the best policies and the best solutions on how to fix all of these things is actually a symptom of a more philosophical difference between the Libertarians and the rest of those minor parties, at least in my view, in that at the crux of it, at the absolute core, Libertarians broadly view the government as this evil, non-benevolent, exploitative entity. And where we see that, and where other, typically conservatives see a thing that they can use to push their view, or a thing that they can fix to push their view, we acknowledge the fact that it is irredeemable by its own nature. That to me is more, and that is where the policies end up coming, the differences in policies is seen.
Yeah, they try to look. People genuinely try to do good, I think, in what they exist. But the reality of it is, we have an election every 3 years, and government can change hands every 3 years. And these additional changes that you make can be exploited or removed by the party that comes in next. And what happens is you just a merry-go-round of what, like, Labor, Liberal, Labor, Liberal, and things just keep getting added along the way that they can't get rid of. And it's just bloating and turning into this monstrosity that's not delivering on what it's supposed to do in the first place. And I think libertarians are unique in that we actually think that a contraction of what exists is a much better path forward. And then what happens is if we are removed, um, it's a lot harder to start building back up again. And we've made progress toward delivering on the rights and freedoms and the economic advantages for the individual in our policy. So we're the only one that's really pushing hard to rein in the government spend.
Very much so. Thank you very much for your time, Ryan. Are there any last messages that you would like to leave our audience with before you go?
I hope that everyone's going to be voting libertarians and minor right parties first, because you do realize that in preferential voting, even if you've got a preference for one of the two majors, even if you put them toward the end of your ballot and you put all the freedom minor parties first, your vote will still cascade to the one that you dislike least or like slightly more than the other one. So make sure you don't put the two-party or Greens, God forbid, anywhere in the front of your ballot. Make sure you put all the freedom minor ones first, because it'll go through the preferences and get to the major that you prefer in the end anyway.
I would love to say that my audience is very educated on voting by this point,
I'm sure
but certainly, definitely need to do that if you are not aware of that already.
Almost every person that I meet in person, I have to explain how preferential voting works too. So I'm just doing my public
No,
service.
and like the majors rely on this. Like a lot of their rhetoric is around the fact that you don't want to waste your vote, therefore you should vote for a major. And I mean, that's the only way you can waste your vote is if you put those first.
Yeah.
So
You can put in like sixth, and it'll be okay. The major you really don't like will be after them, so they won't get it.
Exactly. All right, we'll leave it there. If you don't already, you can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Twitter. Again, thank you very much for your time, Ryan. We will catch you all next time.
Thanks, Pietro. See ya.